Good morning. I wanted to share a concept that really came into view for me this weekend, and it happened at a dinner party. And before I get into it, I just wanted to share for those of you who aren't familiar with this concept of yes and when you do improv, it's this idea that when somebody shares something, you say yes and you add on another glob, almost like another Lego block to their structure, and you can build and build and build. And what happens in a conversation where yes and is the intention is you create space for each other. And the most amazing thing when someone says yes is it creates validation for you. So yes, your idea and my idea, and they can play together and they can be in unity and they can, ping off one another, and it creates this beautiful space. And the reason this reminder came up for me is somebody was asking a question of another person and they said, is it this or is it this? And I realized in the framing of the either or sort of context, you create this really tight, closed structure that doesn't give any space or expansion to experience. It creates almost like an objectification within that person. Well, was it A or was it B? And when you play with this idea of yes and, yes it's A and yes it's B, and maybe it's C and F and Z, you can really create a lot more space, not only for another person, but for yourself. And I really love this concept. I've played with it for a few years now. When I start feeling really closed in or claustrophobic or upset about things, I take a few minutes to examine where do I have an either or construct going on within myself. Either it's this or it's this. And you'll feel, as you start to notice in your life where you have either or, you'll start to notice how those constructs are really limiting. Either we go to Home Depot or we go to HEB, which for those not in Austin is our grocery store. It's this, well, what if I want to go to the park and run around with the dogs? It limits options. And I think naturally when you get in a space, either personally or with another person in conversation or in relationship, the limiting starts to feel restrictive and you start to feel like the world closing in on you. But the world isn't limited and life isn't limited. Life is this expansive, ever growing, yes and sort of experience. Yes, I want to be married and I want to have my freedom. Yes, I want this and I want this. And really the beauty and creativity of life is figuring out yes and, yes, I want this and I want this. How can we play together to create this structure? When we get stuck in the either or, the limitations of that structure really objectify your experience. They really suck the oxygen out of the room. And it doesn't really create space for anybody in that situation to have a more expressive, expansive experience. And so I guess for this week, what I'm wanting to share with you is where in your life do you have an either or construct? Where are you limiting yourself? Where are you saying it has to be this or it has to be this? It can't be yes and, yes and, yes and. Really, the identification of the either or in your life is a really, really amazing tool to create more space. When I was younger, I had a boss that once told me the option between the idea that an option between two choices is an option is a falsity, meaning if it's either or, you're really stuck in the construct of no choice because you only have two things to choose from. But the beauty of the yes and is it creates this continual growth. Yes and, yes and, yes and. It's a back and forth. It's actually a conversation. So remember, where in your life do you feel you only have two options? And really spend some time exploring what's the crazy third option? What's the wild fourth option? What's like the most insane fifth option? And when you can really play with yes and, yes and, yes and in your mind, the whole world changes and you create a lot of space and joy within yourself. And so that's my message for this week. I hope you receive it and enjoy it and let me know what you think about it. Take care. Bye.